Recently I watched a YouTube video about a loudspeaker. The video was 12 minutes long, 10 minutes of a talking head and 2 of the actual loudspeaker. So I decided to make this in-depth series where you will see more of the equipment than on any other channel on YouTube. I hope you guys will enjoy it, and remember, this is not a review, it's a close-up. Today I want to show you a piece of equipment that most of you probably have never heard of, never seen or even heard. And I must admit that up until a year ago I also never heard of this brand. However, that is not too surprising, as this small high-end company mainly produces for its home country of Switzerland. The main reason I wanted to make this video is because I think this is one of those hidden gems that people dismiss too easily because they have never heard of it, or they think that a small amp like this can never sound any good. So let's start with some background information. NEUKOMM was founded somewhere around 1990, and the aim was to use the most modern techniques to provide high quality equipment with a small footprint, as opposed to the humongous back-breaking Krell and Mark Levinson amps that were around at that time. Initially the aim was to make an extremely stable amplifier to feed the amp-killing electrostatic and magnetostatic panel loudspeakers of that time. Another design requirement was to create equipment that would last for a long time. Remember that scratchy volume knob when buying a vintage amp? You won't get that on this NEUKOMM because that is all full electronic, and everything is DC coupled, meaning that no coupling capacitors are used in the signal pack. Capacitors age with time and they don't give you the full spectrum of sound frequencies. And that is why people will always tell you to replace the capacitors when buying a vintage amp. Now, as you all know, I'm not a technical guy, so I just picked up all that technobabble from Wikipedia, but as I understand it, a DC coupled design can sound very good, especially in the low frequencies, but it can also be a dangerous design if it is poorly implemented, so it needs a good protection circuit. Now, most people don't know NEUKOMM, but an amplifier like the wonderful IQ-Phase E405 is also a completely DC coupled design. So the NEUKOMM philosophy is to remove everything that could age or have a negative effect on sound from the design as much as possible. So no mechanical volume knobs on this amp, no mechanical switches to choose sources, and no mechanical tone controls. Now let's have a closer look. On the front, and the front is a 10mm full aluminium plate, on the front we have, from left to right, first the display that is very easy to read even from across the room. To the right of that there are 16 control buttons, and some of those buttons even have double functions, so you can control a lot of things from the front panel, and if you ask me, the amp still looks very clean. Those 16 buttons are divided into 2 groups of 8. The left 8 buttons are for choosing your sources, and the other 8 buttons on the right are for all the other control functions. So there are buttons for 8 sources, even though this amp only accommodates 6 sources. And why is that? Well, I don't really know. All I can say is that the manual states that those buttons are for future developments. Now, the first 2 buttons are labeled CD and tuner, and the other buttons just have a number on them. Looking at the control buttons on the right, starting at the top left, button 1, this is a volume, source and balance preset, meaning that you can program a certain volume, a specific source and a left to right balance under that button. Programming is done by holding the Alt button just below and pushing button 1. And now when you turn on the amplifier, it will start at that preset. Now there's also a preset 2. This one will only program a volume and a balance setting, not a source. This could be helpful if you want to lower the volume but not completely mute the sound, when you want to pick up your phone, for example. So if you push button 2, the amp will immediately jump to that programmed volume setting. But why don't just use the volume control, I hear you ask? Well, good question, and the answer is that the volume control, those are the 2 buttons on the top right, will take much too long to turn down the volume. So now I hear you ask, why is it so slow? Another good question. So the volume control has 99 steps. Every step is a change of just 0.75 dB. The benefit of this is that you can choose the exact volume that you want. For example, if I take my trusty Quad 34 preamp, every step in volume is always a big jump. I'm always left with the volume 3 being too loud and volume 2 being too soft. But not with this amp. I can choose the exact volume that I want. This is especially helpful on my 98 dB Auxilia loudspeakers. And as you can see, it says plus and minus on top of the volume buttons and left and right on the bottom. That is because you can also use these two buttons for balance. And in order to activate the commands that are below the buttons, you have to push and hold the Alt button that is on the bottom left. The last three buttons are for mute, on off, and there is a button for when you have a NEUKOMM multi-room setup. I don't have that, so that is all I can say about that button. Now all this functionality is of course also accessible from the optional full aluminium $300 remote control. I do have the remote, but my girlfriend also has a full NEUKOMM setup and the remote is at her house. So check out my videos about her setup if you are interested. Moving on to the rear, on the top left, there is a set of XLR inputs. This is labeled as input 6, but if you have a XLR CD player connected here, you can program it as input 1. That is the input that is labeled CD on the front and on the remote. Below that are the loudspeaker terminals. They will take banana plugs or bare wire. Spades don't really fit. Moving on, we have all the input sockets, and next to that we have the 4 output sockets. Yes, 4. 2 fixed and 2 variable. Fixed means that the output is not affected by the volume control of the amplifier, and variable means that the output does change if you change the volume on the amplifier. The fixed outputs can be connected to, for example, 2 power amps if they have their own volume control, or it could be 1 power amp and a headphone amp, anything that has its own volume control. The variable outputs can be used for a subwoofer or 2 or for the multi-room capabilities of this amplifier. You can also connect a headphone amplifier to the variable output, so in theory you could also connect 4 headphone amplifiers to this amplifier. So there's more than enough possibilities, I should say. And then there are all these dip switches that are mostly intended for the multi-room application. The connector you see below there is also part of that, and there is a power input socket. And here are some of the specs of the amplifier. They are in German, but if you pause the video I am sure you will figure it out. One thing I do want to mention is the power. The NEUKOMM CPA-43 amplifier will give you 2 times 50 watts on 8 ohm, 2 times 85 watts on 4 ohm. Now this may not seem too much, but this little powerhouse is built to be extremely stable, even under very heavy conditions. For example, with very difficult loudspeakers or with extreme dynamic impulses from the music, this little beast will give you short bursts of 2 times 300 watts on a 1 ohm load, and it won't even break a sweat. So for me, this is the perfect amp to have if I want to give all the loudspeakers that pass through my home a fair chance. Okay, let's wrap this up. As I said at the beginning, this is not a review, it is a close-up. A review will come another time. I do have some sound samples of this amp on my channel, so check those out if you want. And for those of you who are interested, here are some pictures of the inside of the amplifier. I don't have the technical knowledge to explain to you what it is that you see, but I know some of you guys appreciate a closer look of the inside, so here it is. I hope you liked this close-up. If you did, give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.